Hi, I'm Guy Lawrence, and you are listening to the Guy Lawrence podcast. If you're enjoying this content and you want to find out more and join me and come further down the rabbit hole, make sure you head back to guylawrence.com.au. Awesome, guys. Enjoy the show. One. Srini, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Guy. I'm really happy to be here.
Mate, I ask everyone on the show, if a complete stranger stopped you at a cocktail party and asked you what you did for a living, what would you say?
But that happens a fair amount, and I think I say different things to different people on different days. I think for the most part, I am a very curious person. So sometimes I'll comment on what I see is happening. So if somebody comes up to me and says, "Hey, how you doing?" Like if you came up to me at a party, I'd probably say what I said to you when we first started speaking, which is, "What's going on with your awesome spiritual energy?" Like because I would feel it. And in general, I'm very opinionated, but I never think I'm right. So I just rely on people to, if you were not feeling that, you could say, "I'm not feeling that," and that would help me understand that. But yeah, when people ask me what I do, I usually cringe a little because I do so many different things. And the facts are I'm a psychiatrist. I teach at Harvard. I'm a professor, an assistant professor there. I'm also a brain researcher. So I've studied brain blood flow for 17 years. I now have a startup that's called Neuro Business Group, which applies brain science and human psychology to business theory for Fortune 500 companies. I also work as an executive coach. I'm a certified master executive coach, so I work with Fortune 500 leaders doing that. I work in biotechnology, keeping my interest in medicine alive, where I work with investment companies to help them figure out which medications may make it to final FDA approval across cancer, heart disease, stroke, and a number of other disorders. And I'm also I also have 3 tech startups that are all related to brain science, and I'm writing a musical right now. So those are all of the things.
Unbelievable. How do you fit it all in, and how do you know where to put your energy at any one time?
Well, I think certain things are fixed and certain things are more flexible. So the things that are fixed are my regular coaching clients and my regular patients. So I do about 20, 25 hours of that a week. I think with the biotechnology, I do about 20 hours a month. So I have assignments sent to me, and I write up those reports. I get that done. With the musical, I just had an hour of music training a week. I have a piano teacher, and I've studied theory of music and I've studied the piano, but I switched from classical to jazz. And with the musical, something just came over me, and I just decided I needed to find my voice, both the ugly parts and the parts that I appreciated. And so I started by just experimenting with my full range. And I got to some of the ugly parts, and those were a little bit jarring, but I think it gave me insight into parts of my psychology I may have an issue with. And so over the last year, I wrote 40 songs because I don't really think about what's going on. I think for the most part, when you let go of certain things, things happen through you. And so because I've spent a lot of time, I've studied medicine and I've studied music and I've studied biotechnology and I've studied all these things. I feel like it's a time in my life right now where I can let go and play and just let things pass through me. So to a large extent, I know that sounds a little wishy-washy, but to a large extent, I feel like the less you try to control things, the more magically things can happen.
Oh, amen to that. Amen to that. Like, how do you then practice the art of letting go? Because I think that's a great metaphor for life as well. I remember I've got David R. Hawkins's book. It's called Letting Go, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but I've listened to that several times. And it's fascinating. And the more I try to surrender, the more life unfolds. But there's always that part of me that wants to control everything at the same time.
Very much so. I mean, I think that as humans, we're just filled with paradox, right? So I feel like in terms of how do we practice the art of surrender, I would say certain practices introduce us to ways in which we can navigate consciousness and the freedom of certain states of consciousness. So for me, transcendental meditation is a regular practice.
Okay.
I find that helpful. It's anchoring. Sometimes I go off, meaning I don't practice, meditate as often as I need to, and it sort of upsets me. I think my description on my Twitter profile currently describes me well, which is somewhere between martinis and meditation. So I think that that's another way that I surrender. I can't say it's always the best form of surrender, but it's an interesting experimental state to be in. I also, my most recent book, Tinker, Dabble, Doodle, Try, was about learning how to unfocus during the day. And I think a lot of people sort of said to me, why would you want to teach people how to unfocus? Like, most of us are distracted every day. We don't need to learn how to unfocus. And what I said was, your brain actually has to live in cognitive rhythm. Like, you can't be focus, 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 fatigue. You need to go to focus, unfocus, to refuel, and focus, unfocus, to refuel throughout the day. And so one of the things I talk about in the book is the fact that focus is great. I mean, we all need to focus. I'm very pro-focus, but I think it needs to be done in moderation for the following reasons. Firstly, excessive focus depletes your brain of energy. And when it does, it makes you care less about other people. In fact, when you feed people who are excessively focused glucose, they start to care again. So it actually decreases your compassion to just be focusing all day. Number two, focus is great if you have your eye on the goal, but it's not great if it gives you blinker vision, because then you're not noticing what's going on around you. You may have your eye on a relationship, for example, and you may say, I really want to have that relationship, but the problem is you may not be noticing what that person wants. You may just be going on with your agenda. So blinker vision is not helpful. The third thing is that with your nose to the grindstone, you're actually missing upcoming opportunities in the future because you're not looking up. So you don't see when robots are taking over your job. You don't see when opportunities are arriving. The fourth thing is that focus, when you have your eye on one spot, you're not able to make connections between two or more ideas. So focus can limit that. And the fifth, which I think just from our initial conversation is probably what I think is one of the most important things, is that focus essentially brings up parts of your identity metaphorically, like with a fork. So it's like your LinkedIn identity. Where did I work? What did I do? What is my gender? What do I do? Whereas unfocus invites other cutlery or silverware to the table. So unfocus invites a spoon for the delicious melange of flavors of your identity. So that, the scent of your grandmother, or the kinds of paradoxes that people are filled with. I recently was just talking about how so many milestones, normal milestones of life, going to college, getting married, having kids, come with a certain traumatic residue, because for everything that you get, you give up something. And so it's this kind of mixture in your identity. If you can learn to accept it and integrate it, it can really help you. So that's what the spoon does. The chopsticks connect ideas across your brain, and the toothpick or marrow spoon, depending on your dietary preferences, pick on little fragments of your identity in your brain when you are unfocused. And unfocus is when the puzzle pieces come together. So when you focus, what you're doing is picking up different puzzle pieces. When you unfocus, what you do is you give your brain the default mode network. You give this unfocused network time to put the puzzle pieces together. And in the book, I describe a bunch of different ways you can do this. And if you want to go into that, we can go into that as well.
I love that metaphor, and I love I love this topic, Srini. I really do. So there's a couple of things that sprang to mind. The first is that I think we can be so focused. I'm assuming that's going to cause a lot of stress as well. And we're almost like blocking our view of every other possibilities because we're so fixated on the problem at hand. Would be the first thing. And the second thing is how do we get to an unfocused state?
Yeah. So there are a number of different ways that I describe. So when I say to people, I think you should build unfocused periods into your day for 15 minutes at a time.
Okay.
Either in the mid-morning or after lunch or mid-afternoon or end of the day, when your brain would be in a natural slump and you feel like you're dragging yourself through your day. Most people say, I have no time for that. I don't have an extra hour to unfocus. Except that studies have shown that all of us, no one excepted, probably daydream for 46.9% of the day, which means our minds go off task for almost half the day. So why not learn to strategically unfocus is my argument about that. So how do you do that? I'll mention a couple of ways. So one is through a technique called positive constructive daydreaming. Now, Jerome Singer, since the 1950s, has actually studied mind wandering and found that if you sit at your desk and you let your mind slip away, it's not helpful. If you ruminate over the prior night's indiscretion, let's say you had too much to drink and you said stuff you wish you hadn't said, and you worry about that, that also doesn't really help. However, if you institute positive constructive daydreaming, it helps. And here's where I would ask people to take out a piece of paper and pen and write down these three things. Number one, find a 15-minute period in your day. Number two, do something low key. It doesn't work if you're just sitting at your desk. You've got to be knitting or gardening or going for a walk. And number three is you start with a positive wishful image, like running through the woods with your dogs or surfing on the ocean or lying on the beach. And when you do those three things, it's actually helpful. And actually, to develop a more creative brain, walking itself has some nuances attached to it. So walking outside increases creativity in the brain compared to walking in a treadmill. And walking on a curvy path actually increases creativity compared to walking around the block. So, there's a thing called embodied cognition. Our bodies carry intelligence. And if your body moves a certain way, it activates the mind in a similar way. So the first technique is positive constructive daydreaming. The second technique is napping. 5 to 15 minutes of napping a day gives you 1 to 3 hours of clarity. And I've actually started doing this fairly regularly. If after lunch I'm dragging, rather than dragging myself through the day, I sleep for 5 minutes, get up, and it's amazing how fresh you feel. So that's the second technique. The third is doodling. So doodling increases your memory by 29%. That's just scribbling on a piece of paper. The way we might, if you're on the phone, or you might, that scribbling on a piece of paper, actually Jackie Andrade and her colleagues in the UK actually did a study showing that doodling improves your memory by 29%. And one of my favorite unfocused techniques is what I call psychological Halloweenism, which is based on a study that showed that if you're trying to solve a creative problem, and you're trying to let go, like if I say, Guy, I'm going to give you 1 minute, and I want you to come up with 100 as many uses as you can for a break. Go. What studies show is that if you take on the identity of a rigid librarian, you are much more likely to be statistically significantly less creative than if you took on the identity of an eccentric poet. So if you sat back in your chair, maybe wore a cloak, just sort of felt like I'm just like a free-flowing person. And the truth is, if you take the same people, if let's say you were Guy the librarian, you would not be creative. If I then asked you to be Guy the poet, you would start to be the creative. Same person, different self-construct. So I always tell people you can practice this at the table with your family. You can practice it on a date, maybe not a first date. You can practice it when you're with a creative group at work. Practice it with your friends. And you'll see how so often we are in our own way. That we, because of the roles we've defined for ourselves. I'm very big on non-categorization. Some people don't like that because they feel unsafe without boundaries and definitions. It's like, and so that's probably in part why I do so many different things.
Yeah, wow. Is that why? It's interesting because I talk about this often within my community group, where I say, like, who's your superhero? So for me, if I've got to make a business decision or I'm challenged, I actually go, what would Richard Branson do right now, or what would, and actually just try and pretend I'm him for a minute, and how would he behave in that moment?
Exactly. And I think the more you can adopt that person's personality, way of being, how they might think about things, like if I think about myself, giving yourself, right? If I think about myself during exams, I'm very sort of attentive to what I'm doing, focused, got to finish stuff. It's a very different me than when I'm playing music and when I'm trying to invent stuff. So even we ourselves have different kinds of personalities over time. And so I think for every human being out there, I really believe that we hold a lot of untapped potential. And if we can start to experiment and be curious in these unfocused ways, it can release the brain to be more of what it can, of what it is.
Yeah, got it. So to be more productive then through our day, and to, I guess, start to appreciate and almost like stop to smell the roses, because we can forget about that. It's almost like sometimes we need to work smarter and less to get more done.
Absolutely. In fact, the British title of that book is Think Less, Learn More. But I think one of my favorite titles of that same book is the Italian title, which is Il potere del cazzeggio, which essentially means the power of effing around.
I love it. So I got a question I've been itching to ask you as well, because I remember watching the movie The Matrix, right? And Neo, when he come in, they were going to teach him kung fu, and they literally just like plugged this thing into the back of his neck, and all this information just came flowing in. And the next thing you know, Keanu Reeves can do kung fu. And I always think, oh, imagine we could just learn, that way. But obviously, I don't think we're there yet. But what does fascinate me, and the more as I'm getting older and I want to absorb and learn more information, I'm still trying to figure out what's the best way of retaining it. Because it's all well and good to read a book or listen to an audio or a podcast like, people are listening today. But how do we actually get that in so we embody it? So, it's there for us when we need it.
So, I think a lot of different ways that I think people have talked about over the years and that I've seen as well. The first thing I would say is retaining it is both conscious and unconscious. And really the unconscious does probably most of the brain's work. So if you don't remember something consciously, it does not mean that you haven't retained it. It could have sunken into your unconscious. I would say if you talk to most memory specialists would say the way to retain things is through association or through image or through mnemonics. So, as you're hearing what I'm telling you about, you could make a little diagram of someone doodling, of somebody sleeping for daydreaming, or of somebody walking outside, or of somebody with the mask on. And those four associations quickly help you recall what you need to recall in order to do something. So memory specialists often look for associations or patterns about the information. So one thing to do is to take that information, like let's say someone's listening to this podcast, they would say, oh, let me have dinner with somebody else tomorrow, ask them to listen to it, and we'll talk about it. And that way you start to form the patterns in your brain that you need to form. Some people would say repetition, you need to do something over and over again. Like Malcolm Gladwell talked about 10,000 hours of practice is what's needed for mastery. But it was Brooke McNamara at Princeton recently showed that that's probably not the case. Because if you look at how much deliberate practice contributes to success, it contributes most to success for video games. I think the percentage is something like 26 or 27%. For music, it's 21% of the success pie. For sport, it's 18% of the success pie. For jobs, it's 4%, and for academics, it's 4%, and for jobs, it's 1%. That's how little doing something over and over again matters. So I don't think it's so much about deliberate practice as much as it is about inspired practice. So doing something over and over again can be helpful, but if you're not connected with what you're doing, you've just become a machine, and it's very hard to hold on to that information. So I would say if somebody's saying, well, what are the 3 things I can do to listen to your podcast? And I would say the first thing is short-term memory is like a cup, and it can only take a certain amount of information. So overfilling that cup is not that helpful. What you want to do is say, well, what are the top 3 things I took away from this podcast? It'll fit in the cup. I can take it away. What images can I make associated with that? Then you draw a little image next to that. You say, what's the relationship between the first, second, and third thing? And that helps you draw that relationship. And the 4th thing is to say, how can I practice it in my day when I most care about it? Like, how can I bring this to my day in a meaningful way? I think authenticity is a really powerful way to cement memory. Another thing you can do is associate it with smells, with tastes. A lot of people remember some of their dates because they remember the lighting and the atmosphere. So, there are a lot of ways at getting at retention of memory. I do think soon there will be devices we'll be able to implant. And I think sort of overfilling your brain with information is not that helpful. I mean, a lot of information you can just get with a search engine. So rather learn the stuff that a search engine is not going to give you than let your brain become a search engine, because it's probably not as good a search engine as an actual search engine.
Yeah, it's interesting because even when I read or study something, I get this habit and I catch myself that I almost like just want to get to the end as
Right.
opposed to absorbing the information as I go along and slow it down and enjoy the process.
Well, there's a mechanism called photo reading, which I recently heard about. I don't know a lot about it, but I would look it up. And I met the person who's sort of invented this. Essentially, they find that when we read slowly, we're trying to absorb information. That information is processed by the primary visual cortex in the brain, the part of your brain that picks up images. The words are registered and then stored. Photo reading is basically you're paging through the book, and rather than looking at every word and trying to understand every sentence, your mind takes a snapshot of each page. And studies have actually shown that if you do this in a certain way, you can still remember an incredible amount.
Wow.
So this is another way of, sort of remembering that I think can be really helpful.
Yeah, amazing. I'm going to shift topics slightly, and there's something else I wanted to discuss with you about. And I think to everyday life, and quite often we want to move towards the things, like we said, become passionate about things and purpose, and we get caught up in that narrow focus where we constantly fixated on the problems ahead, and we never feel like we're making progress in life quite often. And yet when we go to make decisions, we actually start to become then fearful of the changes that come, and then we end up with the better the devil we know, as opposed to moving from the place of where we are to where we actually truly want to be. From all your learnings and experience, why do you think we do that? And how can we overcome it?
So when there's change, the brain goes into a state of chaos that we call cognitive dissonance. So imagine that your brain is just silent. All of a sudden, there's a message, hey, we've got to change this. You're going to start going to the gym. Hey, you've got to change this. You've got to really up your game at work. Your brain starts saying, freaking out and panicking. That's called cognitive dissonance. Now, when there's cognitive dissonance, it occurs because you have to pay a psychological price for change. Anything that you do is going to create fear. It's going to make you feel anxious. It's going to make you feel afraid that you're not going to be able to finish it. You're going to start saying, what if I fail? It's going to be unfamiliar. So in order to do something, you have to pay the psychological price for pain that we call switch cost. So the reason we tend to go back is when the brain goes into the state of chaos, you have only two options. One is to go back, so now it's not threatened by the change and there's no dissonance. Or the other is to go forward. And unlike in Macbeth, where Macbeth said it was as tedious to go back as to go forward, and just proceeded with all of his crimes. In this case, with a positive change, you really want to just keep moving on. And there are ways that you can deal with the switch cost that will actually help your brain. So, for example, in order to quiet the conflict center from going haywire and going crazy, you can actually stimulate the left frontal cortex. Now, short of having an electrode, there are a couple of other ways that you can actually do this. One is through a technique that we call spreading of alternatives, which essentially means alternative A is I want to keep eating what I want to eat and keep my weight where it is. Alternative B is I want to give up eating stuff, even stuff I like, and I want to lose weight. Now, if you write a list of, well, what's great about keep staying where I am? I can eat the sausages I like. I don't have to worry about cakes. I can be happy when I'm feeling stressed at work. I can keep the same friends. There's a lot of good things about that. Then if you say, well, what are the advantages of changing all of this. You say, well, you can look better, you can feel better, other people will feel better about you, you'll be healthy, you won't die prematurely, you'll be able to have physical fitness until an old age. You keep on saying these things until your brain is really convinced that there's a big spread of between, for each advantage of B that you're creating, you create a big spread of alternatives. And what studies show is that when the spread is great enough, it suddenly stops all that brain chaos and you become more committed to the change. It's got to be authentic and it's got to reach threshold. So you don't just in theory, like most people say things like, oh, of course it's better to diet, you'll look better. But they don't actually think about that. Yeah. Like I don't think, for the longest time, I mean, I've been training, I've been becoming progressively healthy, but slowly. I still like a lot of unhealthy foods. And I like those foods. So when I talk to my trainer about it, part of what I say is, I've learned recently, for example, we were talking about exercise, and I said, I think I'm going to have to change my whole concept about exercise because I've been playing tennis and I feel like my quads get too tight. And I said, I work, like in general, I love thinking about what I'm doing. So I can sit still for a large number of hours and not get up and just write and read. But I've realized that even though that's a lot of my profession, rather than just working out, twice a week with weights and 3 or 4 times with the elliptical, I need to stretch probably 5 to 7 times a week. And I need to think of my body as needing more time. This is a very big decision to make. My brain does not like this. My brain says, nope, you've got no time for that. You got to write this book, you got to do this project. And I've got to convince my brain that that's not the only thing that matters. That actually long-term, it matters to me that I can keep on playing tennis. It matters to me that I don't get too stiff too soon. And so as I start to tell my body that, my brain that, it starts to not freak out as much because it fully grasps what I actually feel. Now, if you told me the same thing 2 years ago, I would have thought what you said was technically right, but I would not have felt it. Okay. But now, because I deeply appreciate what it's like to have a different body, I feel like, I probably should not get hung up on all this intellectual work. My body's important as well. So to anybody out there wanting to make a change, I would say convince your brain, be your brain's friend, but convince your brain that whatever discomfort you feel about the change, whatever anxiety, whatever uncertainty, whatever unfamiliarity you feel, let it be worth it. Let your brain know that you're paying that price, the switch cost, so you can move forward. And that's sort of one way you can do that. The other is to resolve what we call a goal intentions into implementation intentions. So, you were talking about setting intentions, and intention is not just, I want to lose weight. It's like, I want to lose 10 pounds in the next month by exercising 3 times a week at 8 a.m. Like that's an implementation intention. And the more you can switch a lot of your intentions to implementation intentions, the more likely you are to be able to achieve your goals. And there's a lot of other ways as well, but those are 2 basic things to remember.
Got it. And then you start looking for opportunities to support it as opposed to obstacles. And especially
that's right.
As you start to feel it more.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the more you connect with your vision of what you want, and the more you connect with it emotionally, where you seed this vision with feelings, then your mind starts orienting itself to possible opportunities. And it says, yeah, that's great. No, that's great. So I think for a large number of people, it's not that they don't know how to do something. It's that they've not released their minds or their attention to attend to the thing that could help them most. Yeah. Most people who do not achieve their goals, and I would say this is true of me as well. Like, I don't think I am always in possession of my goals. Like, I feel like I'm even aware of the theory I'm telling you about. I've worked with people who've achieved amazing goals in their lives. I see it. It's not just a question of executing what someone else did. It's not just a question of, it actually has a lot to do with self-representation. So in the brain, like, let's just say I want to make $200,000 next year. Let's say somebody says that. I want to find a life partner. I want to lose 25 pounds. There's the I part, and then there's the rest of the sentence. And the I part matters. And studies show, there's a theory called relevance of a representation, but studies show that brain representations of yourself need to be active all the time. Like, let's say, like, I like wearing odd rings. I actually dress much more eccentrically than I do in podcast situations. I'm wearing leopard pants right now. Like so I like to do whatever I feel like doing. And so for me, the reason that I can feel like it allows me to engage more really is that you have a number of self-representations that are who you are. And, some people will like it, some people won't. That's fine. I mean, people are allowed to have their preferences. I just think we also are allowed to be who we are. And so studies show that motivation is actually improved if you can have more self-representations on board in your brain. And so I think one of the questions to ask is, are there ways in which I am me, but I'm not able to be me at work or at home or amongst people? And can I start to be me a little bit more? Like, I remember the first corporate gig I went to, I was like, oh, maybe I should take the rings off. They're going to think I'm crazy. And I thought, like, why would I do that? I'm gonna take the rings off. It'll help me, but in the long term, it's going to hurt me because I'm not going to be me. Now, it doesn't mean I'm always going to wear rings. I could change my mind. I wouldn't probably dress a particular way to a funeral. There are ways I can change what I'm doing. But the message is who you are matters when you bring yourself to do anything in the world.
Yeah, got it. And it almost then comes down to creating a self-awareness and coming back to know thyself and trying to be true to that self and not show up for anyone else, but you're authentically you when you come to whatever situation. And I think that's huge.
Yeah, I think it is too. I know Warren Bennis is my favorite thinker in leadership development. And when he was asked after, I think he died close to the age of 90, but he was asked, what is a leader? And he said, becoming a leader is synonymous with becoming yourself. It's precisely that easy and also that difficult. Because the truth is, it's very difficult to be all of who we are. Yeah. Like sometimes people will say, oh, don't Instagram because the venture capitalists won't take you seriously for your tech company. It's like, what are you talking about? I'm the same person. Like, I can take tech seriously. I can go out with my friends and have a good time and also work. Like, we're all, so I think being able to master the complexity of who we are is important. And I think this kind of self-representation in the world really matters because it gives you what I call a psychological center of gravity. A good example, Lady Gaga, who, it's amazing. When people look at her, they think, oh, there's this eccentric woman who's wearing a meat dress and singing these crazy songs. Well, she did a really cool video in which she reached an existential point in her career when she said, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I hate my job. I hate my life. And she said, I don't want to take selfies. I feel like I have much more to offer the world. So why should I be taking selfies all the time? I don't want to sell perfumes. I don't like perfumes. They annoy me. And I don't like working for other people and just making their money because it doesn't make me feel good. And so she said her key for self-awareness was when she learned to say no. So when she learned to say no, that's when she actually said, when she learned to say no, she actually had this awareness that she said, I'd go home and I'd look at myself in the mirror and I'd say, you I can sleep with because you know what you're doing, because you are actually being who you are. And you have integrity. And because you have integrity, I can sleep restfully. And I think that's the thing to ask. Are there any values that you're being forced to represent that you can't represent? Is there any truth that you're being forced to ignore that you don't want to ignore? And are you out of control so much that you cannot do what you need to do? Those three things, value, truth, and control, are what determine our motivation to get ahead. And so ask yourself if you are in alignment with yourself when you're thinking about what you're doing. And remember, being yourself is just as much about saying no as it is about saying yes. Make a column. What are 3 things I want to say no to today? and then stick by that for the next month. See how that works out.
Love it. Love it. And you can imagine how Lady Gaga felt when she's gone, sod it, I'm just coming back to this. And I often wonder the health implications that can have on the body and the stress if we're constantly feel like we're forcing this way of being and it's just so misaligned to who we actually are. And
It is. It actually affects the cellular metabolism at the level of the mitochondria. So every cell has a little energy factory, and the energy factory for every cell is working hard so that the cell can do its work. Your liver cells have these energy factories so the liver can churn things out. Kidney cells have this, your heart cells have this. What studies show is that stress impacts the way the energy factory works in the cell. And so as a result of that, you can get a number of diseases, heart disease, stroke, immunologic problems. Every disease you can think of, stress can play a role because it's impacting that cell at the level of the mitochondria.
And we're always looking for the external solution quite often. Oh, if I take this, it's going to fix this. Or if I have that, it'll fix that problem. Where the last place we look is at ourselves.
That's true. And the paradox, I mean, the absurdity, the irony of that is that that's where so many of the answers are.
Totally. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So I'm going to change gears, Srini, and I got some questions I ask everyone on the show. And the first one is, what's one of your low points in your life you've had, but later in life has turned into be a blessing?
I mean, there are a lot. I think a lot of times earlier on in life, I never really felt like I understood boundaries of identity in any way. And so I think in a lot of relationships, I'm fortunate to have a lot of very loving relationships then and now, but I felt like I had to compromise much more about my unsureness. So I would say in high school, for example, there was this feeling of like, well, what do you want to do? And, in relationships, I feel like these days I'm much more comfortable just being unsure. If I think about events in my life, I think, when my mom was first diagnosed with a cancer and I didn't know what the outcome of that would be, and I was very attached to her. And I remember at the time feeling like, I'm not going to be able to go on with my life without her. Like, how does this work? And then I thought, that's not the thought process. The thought process is, how do I bring life to her and me? And I think learning through that adversity, and she's been alive for many, many, many years now, and learning through that process, I think really drove me. For example, she had a cancer of the jaw, and they had said that they were going to need to remove the jaw completely. And my brother said to me, because I was a medical student at the time, he said, please, like, I got the best guy in the country. Do not interfere with his judgment. You're just like a little snippety medical student. And I said, I don't care. This is my mother. And so when I said, show me the x-ray. And they showed me the x-ray. And I looked at it and I said, I don't think this needs a complete jaw exenteration. There's no need to remove the entire jaw. It just needs a local resection. And I think my brother was very upset. He's like, why are you telling this guy? I said, it's because of what I see. And I walked around and I gave it to other radiologists. It came from an attitude of first being in shock. If I was in shock, I would have done nothing. I think once I realized that I had to give my energy to that situation, it taught me that in every situation where I'm faced with any kind of adversity, it's important to really go for it and be yourself. So in the first instance about unsureness, I think I'm just much more comfortable being unsure because most of the time I don't know what's going on in the world. And so that's my state of being. And that's what I say, and I can still have a good time. I think with regard to actual adversity and circumstances like that, being able to turn that around and say, I'm actually going to be the energy for this person. It actually changes things around, and you do things you wouldn't ordinarily do, and you see things and you say things you wouldn't ordinarily see and say.
Yeah, wow. And I'm sure it reveals parts of yourself you didn't even know were there.
Yeah. I mean, and that's an ongoing reality in life. Right?
Totally. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. What does your morning routine look like?
I try not to have a routine. So I I'm not a huge fan of routines.
I love it.
I would say some of the things I do are I'm one of those slightly annoying people. I get up with a spring. Like I'm very awake when I'm awake, and when I go to sleep, I sleep in 1.5 seconds. So it's like if I decide to sleep, I close my eyes. If I get up in the morning, I'm like, oh, great. And when I get up, the first thing I want to do is usually think and write. So what I like to do, if I had to, there isn't really a routine, but if I had to generalize average over a large period of time, I would say write a little, meditate, then have conversations or morning ablutions, and then just get ready for work. I think over time, I've managed to construct a life that doesn't have to be immensely structured. So just a couple of days a week, I have to go into my office and do what I need to do. But a lot of the days, I don't believe as much in doing and planning as people do. I plan a lot, I strategize a lot, but I really believe in the power of surrender. Once the plan is there are other energies that need to just be involved. So the short answer is I don't really have routines that much.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I love it. I'm so glad you're on the podcast saying this because I'm the same. I kind of float through my day quite often, even though I've got a bigger vision of my future. I just kind of see what shows up at the same time. And
Right.
synchronicities and things open up so much better than when I'm like, got to do this, got to structure this, and I'm off, where you can
Yeah.
pivot and write and magic can happen.
Well, one of the things I was asking myself before this podcast, I was thinking, we had trouble connecting for the first couple of times. I think I didn't put it in my schedule once, and something else happened another
Yeah.
time. And you said, I'm sure it'll happen when it happens. And I thought that too. And I don't know. I just assume and intuit energies about people in emails, even if I don't know who they are, as I imagine they do with me. And I asked myself today, it's so interesting. I wonder what it is about now that makes our meeting right compared to like a week ago or a month ago. And I'm still interested in that question. I have some thoughts about the subterranean sort of dynamics in the conversation, and I'm like, what was different 1 month ago? But that's the kind of question I would ask
Yeah.
myself, like, because I obviously something feels right about today. I wonder why today rather than a month ago. I don't know the answer, but I'm curious about it.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. If you could have dinner with anyone tonight from anywhere in the world at any time frame, past or present, who would it be and why?
So I'll try to not say my family or my mother, although I think that would definitely feature on the top
Yeah.
three, because they're awesome and I love having dinner with them. But so if I just think about, and also I'll try to exclude friends because I love all the people who are I'm close to in my life. So I think I'll walk you through some of my thinking without knowing exactly. I actually answered this question once for a club that I wanted to join, and all sorts of crazy answers came up. Like I wanted D.H. Lawrence, Barbara Streisand, Jay-Z to all be at this party. I think D.H. Lawrence has always been a lifelong satisfaction, because of the way he writes and his curiosity and the thought of being able to sit with him and talk to him about women in love and what he was thinking when he was writing Women in Love would be amazing. On the other hand, he seemed to have a certain kind of coldness and edge to him I might have been more receptive to maybe like 5 years ago. So, and similarly with Marcel Proust. Those are my two favorite authors. I think I really love, what they're doing. If I could have dinner with anyone, I mean, what's interesting about asking this question is that I don't know if this has to do with immediacy, but you definitely also feature. I would be like, well, why wouldn't I want to have dinner with you if we're talking like this? Like why? Because then we'll get to know each other better. It'll help an understanding of this. So it doesn't strike me like I don't have somebody I'm just like, oh my god, I have to like would I like to have dinner with Einstein? Sure. Would I like to have dinner with Freud? Absolutely. Would I like to have dinner with the TM Maharishi. I mean, absolutely. I guess in the abstract, maybe this would win over everything. I'd like to have dinner with God.
Yeah. Perfect.
I think
I'll put myself under that. That'll be fine. Yeah.
I think dinner with God would be my choice.
Yeah, it'd be a pretty interesting conversation too, for sure. Last thing, is there anything you'd like to add for our listeners to ponder on with everything we've covered today?
I think I would like your listeners to just really change the paradigm of how they listen to podcasts, to people like me, and to recognize that all of this information is only valuable if they integrate it into their own ingenuity. That a lot of times our self-constructs get in our way, and our deepest ingenuity is not involved in our day-to-day thinking. And I don't just mean this in an inspirational way. I mean it like the study I like to refer to here is the One Laptop Per Child project, where they dropped laptops in rural Ethiopia where kids had never seen technology before. Like they didn't even know what it was. Like they wondered, would they eat them? Would they sit on them? Like what would they do when they see these objects? And what they found was that I think within a few minutes or hours, they found the on-off button. Within a few days, they were singing ABC songs and using apps. And within a few months, they hacked Android. And it speaks to the fact that with curiosity and no limits on who you think, like they were not saying, well, I'm not qualified, I don't have a computer science degree, I don't know how to do this. Curiosity can really lead us into parts of ourselves and into solving problems that this kind of life defined by education cannot. I think a lot of people feel like, well, I wasn't good at school, so I'm probably not going to do well. I'm not really driven, so I can't. All these are preconceived notions. As of today, if you were going to do yourself the biggest favor, just try as earnestly as you can to leave those preconceptions behind and ask yourself, what is my greatest possibility in life? What is my greatest vision in life? And if I were to do one thing today, what would that be? Remembering that ingenuity, like in those Ethiopian kids, is in every human being. We've just blocked it out with the traumatic residue of normal milestones.
Oh, that is awesome. I love that. Absolutely love it. And for anyone listening to this that wants to find out more about you and your books and everything, where can we send them to, Srini?
I think my website's a good place to start, which would be drsrinipillay.com, DRSRINIPILLAY.com. And I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram. The book is Tinker, Dabble, Doodle, Try, Unlock the Power of the Unfocused Mind. It's on Amazon in all countries, or in the US, Barnes & Noble. So I hope people will take a look and really use this as just one of hopefully many influences they can integrate in their lives, remembering that the most important influence of all is themselves.
Yeah, beautiful. And we'll end it there. Thank you so much for joining us today. That was fantastic.
Thanks for having me.
And I certainly encourage everyone to check out your book. I think if we can grasp a toolkit to help us absorb information and learn and change our identity and who we are back to our true selves, then it's got to be a winner. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Lovely to be with you. Bye.